So as Angela noted, my name is Noah Crucell. I'm the VP of Product Development for a firm that's based here in St. Louis, Missouri, called Evolve24. Evolve24, I'm going to try to keep it to a minimum tonight about making this the Evolve24 show. But Evolve24 is a big data analytics firm focused on helping the Fortune 500 and the Global 1000 do business. And I've been with this firm for just about 10 years. I'm coming up on my 10th year this February. And I've seen it all in terms of the big data industry. My roles at Evolve24 have been very dynamic, and that's why I've been with the company for so long. So I've seen everything from analytics to the client-facing role, and now I'm overseeing the product. And I'm there because I'm making sure that our products and our research are firmly aligned with what the market is looking for in terms of a big data solution. So what Evolve24 does, we're a big data exchange. We imbibe data, we send data out, and I'm going to be talking tonight about our perspective on data. And you're probably wondering at this point, what the heck is this mosquito eating the east coast of Canada? So Brian, while we were mingling, already picked up on it that I am from Canada, so if you pick up on any boots or Canadianisms along the way, I'm not from Minnesota, which is what I often get, but I'm originally from Canada. So Brian asked a great question. He said, how did you get involved in this industry? And that harkens all the way back to my days back in the homeland and what I was doing back there. So I was working for a few years for a government contractor that worked for the Canadian government. And what we were doing was we were analyzing all types of environment data. We were taking a look at weather patterns, water temperature, all with the purpose of stemming the tide of the West Nile virus. So we were basically looking at disease vectors and saying, these are the areas that we think are most at risk based on these environmental factors. So we're building prediction models using data from the environment, and it was really exciting. So how did I come from that environment to this environment? So prior to working in the government, I was doing some teaching, and my postgraduate was in geographic information systems and science. So at that time, that technology was very new, very nascent. This has just become prolific now. It's basically threaded through all of our global techs and our online services. But back then, it was a nascent technology, and I was in that postgraduate as a communications major. So you can imagine a communications guy being in a geography postgraduate with hardcore physical geographers hanging out, bathymetrists hanging out, going, "What are you doing here?" And I was interested in mapping ideas, mapping culture, mapping ideology. Can we actually overlay these things on physical maps? So this is what I was doing. And our CEO, Tony Sardella, who's also Canadian, has strong ties back to the University of Toronto, all of the networks in academia back there. So he actually found a lot of the work that I was doing in this domain, where I was intersecting communications along with geographic information sciences. He said, hey, this is really interesting stuff. This is the kind of thinking that we want to apply to our business and where we're headed. Why don't you come and join Evolve24? And the rest is history. And the company's been fantastic to me. Moving down here has been great. I'm also a WashU alumni, so if there are some alum in the room, let's talk. I'm also a big British motorcycle enthusiast. I love motorcycling, so if you want to talk my ear off about motorcycles, let's do that. I'm going to make a prediction tonight. So before we kick this off, let's make this a little interactive. So I want everybody to pull up their phone. If you need a calculator, go for it. We're going to pick a number between the number 1 and 10. We're going to multiply that number by 9. We're going to add that result together. So if you wind up with 45, just add those two numbers together. Subtract from your answer 5. Break out the calculators. Yeah, break out your calculators. The math is over though. Now we're going to get into the alphabet. So take that number and correspond it with the alphabet. Okay. Think of a country beginning with that letter. Choose an animal that begins with the last letter of that country. And then choose a color that begins with the last letter of that animal. And I promise this.
What was the last one?
Choose a color that begins with the last letter of the animal. I promise this will all make sense at the top of the hour. Everybody got it? No? Couple folks to my chagrin from my team. And okay, we got to move on. So, so Evolve 24, as I noted, it's a big data analytics firm. We deal with all types of data, and I'm going to talk about the primary source of data that we deal with. But success to Evolve 24 is really dealing with these four things. We're looking at neuroscience-based analytics. Okay, so we're really interested in the way people think, what makes them behave. So I'm going to be talking a lot about that tonight. Okay. We're also interested in having a big data research approach, so one that includes proper measures, proper frameworks, proper integration and visualization of all that data. And then, of course, this is all very important quant-based insight, right? Making decisions not on qualitative gut feelings, heuristics, but on quant. And then using that quant insight to drive strategic outcomes for businesses that we work with. And I'll talk about where we apply big data across the enterprise. So this is what I find very interesting about what we're talking about tonight. You know, we're talking about big data. What is big data? You know, you read a lot of articles out there today. It's the three V's, right? Volume, velocity, variety. Is there any other big V that they use to talk about big data? What I find really interesting about the popular press, the business press that talks about big data, is that often when you read these articles, they're not talking about exactly what big data is. It's like, oh, big data, you need to use it. It's valuable to your organization. You can make decisions based off of this information, but they often fail to define what big data is. So one of the big sources of big data is social and digital content. So I find it staggering that over the past 2 years alone, and this is a hockey stick, okay? Over the past 2 years alone, we've created more content, more digital content than we have in the history of mankind. Okay? So I'm sure everybody's got their device tonight. We're all online. We're tweeting. We're posting to Facebook. We're liking things. We're sharing data. This giant digital exchange, we've created a massive amount of public, available content that we can use for business insight and apply to our businesses. So I'm going to talk about this as the primary source of data tonight. We're going to talk about how this data has transformed the way that we do business. Okay? So what's interesting about this content is that 80% of it is what's considered unstructured. Okay? Many of us in our daily jobs were used to structured content, right? Tabular information and placed in nice, neat columns and rows. Much of this content is all unstructured. It's messy. It's chaotic. It's hard to handle, right? So these are posts, people talking, people sharing, right? It's all over the board. So we'll talk a little bit about managing that data tonight as well. I find these statistics, these are already outdated. I put this together a month ago, and I'm sure they're already out of date. So I find these statistics really, really fascinating. In terms of Facebook, 2.5 million posts per minute, 300,000 tweets per minute, and the list goes on and on across all of these social and digital platforms. Just an enormous amount of data. We used to use an irregular measure at Evolve 24, and I've since forgotten it. The Library of Congress stores X number of gigabytes or terabytes of data. Well, we well exceed those numbers now, just in terms of what we're imbibing and storing in terms of all this information that's being created. So what has all of this data done for us? It's changed the way we can derive insight about our industry, our business, our competitors, our brands, our products. Right? Traditional ways of doing that were typically using focus groups, surveys, right? Where your numbers were in the hundreds, or maybe if you were lucky, thousands. With the advent of social and the additional layer of digital content, that's just exploded. You can't make a comparison now between survey and all the other data that's available to us. So the insights pool has grown enormously. So now where before you may have only been getting a sample, right, of the population that you were interested in, it's highly likely that you can actually capture the whole population, right, if you're looking in the right places. So we've gone from very small samples to very large samples. And another big key here is that we've gone from what's essentially rear view facing data, survey data, to near real-time information that we can make business decisions on, and we can act in the now, rather than waiting for surveys to be completed, focus groups to be completed, and getting old results, right? So, really interesting. But, and this is a big but, this is where I will agree with the popular press, you can't just throw data together in a giant salad bowl and expect it to provide insight. It's inherently not valuable. So in order to make this data valuable, in order to build it into the organization as something that can actually drive outcomes, you need to shape that data. You need to mold it like clay and draw that value out of it. So this large corpus of digital data that I'm talking about, it doesn't really do much. You know, you can put Facebook together, you can put Instagram together, you can put Twitter together, but it doesn't really do a whole lot on its own. So we have to start relying on key things such as the metrics that comes along with all of this content. So where was it published? The geographic aspect, the timeline, all of these aspects that come with this information. Who authored all of this data? You start to peel back the onion on this content and you can derive deep insights from it. But you can't stop there. You also need to extract from this data what we call at Evolve 24 indicators, or key markers on that information. And so at Evolve 24, some of the key markers that we're pulling off of this information are things like sentiment. Are people positive or negative about a brand, or an experience, or a particular product, or even an event? How emotional are they about that particular event or product? And I'll talk a little bit about emotion and how that's different from sentiment. Okay? And then other aspects such as influence. Who's influential within a conversation? Or how is my brand even doing? Right? So opinion, trust. All of these things can be derived from all of this content using the proper technologies and the right framework. Okay. Everybody tracking so far? I'm going to pause. Any questions? Okay. So I find this very cool. Once you start pulling these indicators off the data, you can actually start to make predictions and forecasts with this information. So now, not only are you getting real-time streams of information, but you can also, with the right metrics and the right frameworks, start to make predictions based off of this information. Where is my business headed? What's going to happen next? How do I allocate and plan for these things, right? So the metrics that we're using at Evolve 24 have been known to predict certain endpoints. Our opinion metric, for example, has been shown to predict up to 2 weeks in advance the consumer sentiment index. Many of you in the room familiar with the consumer sentiment index? University of Michigan study done monthly, right? Backward-looking study. Many people make decisions about securities based off this information. How confident are people in the economy? What's going on? We can predict that survey up to 2 weeks in advance with a high level of accuracy. So, with the right measures, the right data, the right measures, and the right indicators pulled off of this information, we can start to become highly predictive of endpoint. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. So, as I noted, the data itself isn't inherently useful. You need to do things to it. We know that you can get insights out of this, but you need to really start to work with that data in order to garner insight, what we call foresight, predictive aspects, as well as cross-sight. So some of you, I've met a few of you in the room tonight, and some of you are working in certain types of industry, right? Well, we know that there's adjacent industries that you're probably thinking about. You know, we work with a lot of automakers, for example. We now know that automakers aren't just combustion engines on wheels, right? They are companies that are focused on what's latest in technology, what are the opportunities and the threats there. So these are the types of firms that we're talking to. They're asking questions like, well, what's happening adjacently? What's going on in the technology industry or the tablet industry that we need to be aware of, so that we can bake these insights back into our products so that we can capture market share, drive revenue, right? So you can use this data for insight, foresight, cross-sight, and you can use it to apply it from both an opportunity perspective. What are the opportunities in the market? What are the opportunities with unknown or unidentified targets? As well as what are the risks within these markets? So when we start to look across these areas from an insight perspective, you start to see some of the applications. So you can start to understand how well is my brand or my product performing? How well am I doing against competition? What are the markets or consumer needs that I might not be meeting? What's latent there? As well as what are some of the external forces that might be affecting my business? Is an NGO going to step up and say something bad about me? Try to limit my license to operate, right? So once you start to ask these questions about, okay, well, it's great that we can get insight, but what are the applications? You start to realize that there are areas across your enterprise that you can start to apply this data to start solving problems. So 3 of those major areas or markets are looking at brand program performance or effectiveness, and there's a small distinction there. Performance is my brand program doing what I expected it to do? Is it reaching the audiences that I expected it to do? Or effectiveness, which is this driving the bottom line, or is it helping me from a cost perspective? So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight as well. And then consumer and market insight, right, latent needs, and then enterprise risk management. Am I going to bump into something that I might not have seen prior? And then again, with the proper measures, measures and frameworks, you can really start to drill down into what, so what, and what's next. So we're going to hang out here for a while because there's a lot to digest on this particular slide. A lot of folks these days are asking, what do millennials care about? Kind of a broad question given how big the age group is. I'll comment on that in a moment as well in terms of some of the companies that we work with who are trying to attach their marketing to millennials. But before I do that, let's talk about what we're doing here from a framework perspective. So you've gathered up all this information, you've extracted measures and metrics from this information, but now how do you make use of it? So as I noted before, this data is highly unstructured, it's messy. How do we make sense of these conversations, these actions that are happening in the digital sphere? So what you're seeing in this cluster are actual conversations. Each one of these data points is its own unique conversation, and it's coming out of the millennial segment. Okay? So what we're able to do is say, this is a conversation. Here's another conversation. And as that data flows in real time, we can put these conversations into nice, neat little piles. It's funny, we were working with one of the automakers that we work with was using our smart board. These are live systems where data's flowing through. They've got their data flowing through. They've got customer service surveys. They've got digital content flowing through the dashboard. And this is one of the views that they have. And they said, there must be something wrong with your system. We keep seeing this discussion around tasers coming up. And it was a code word that these folks were using to talk about tasers. Can you go check your system? Can you find out what this conversation was about? So at the same time, this automaker was having an issue with cars being returned in California completely fried. Their electrical systems were completely toast. People were coming back to the dealership, returning these vehicles, and getting a new car. And the reason they were able to do that was because at the time there was a lemon law in California that said if the car conks out because of an electrical or otherwise, or an issue otherwise, you can get a new car within a 2-year time frame. So what was really interesting about this is that the company was looking at this through the lens of an operations and a supply chain problem. They were saying, well, something's got to be wrong. Let's go and talk to all of our suppliers. Let's find out what the root problem is here. And as I noted simultaneously, we found this taser conversation. So we looked into it. And what we found out was that there's a population of people out there that got smart to this lemon law and were taking tasers to their engines and returning the vehicle back to the dealer, getting a new vehicle. So what the company thought was a supply chain issue because of their internal bias around their own business actually turned out to be a legal issue, right? So the reason why I said I want to hang out here for a moment, oh, Brian?
And people were commenting about this in a channel that you could tap into?
Yes. And what's interesting about that?
Someone said, I tasered my engine and got a new car.
Small oversimplification, but they're talking about, what's interesting about BMW owners, I don't know if there are any in the room, but they talk about engine codes. They talk about quarter to 8 or whatever the model numbers are. They talk in code, right? And so folks were talking about this in an esoteric manner. And if you dig into the conversation, you can start to peel back what's going on. So much so that we actually were able to drill down into the information and get addresses. So they were able to contact local authorities. So what's great about this approach, don't take it. We'll find you. But why I raised this is because all traditional research is really focused on a priori decisions, right? We go into certain situations like focus groups, surveys, with these pre-made ideas about what we want to ask, how we're going to ask it. And what does that do? It stilts the outputs, right? You're not getting the true read on what's going on. So by bringing this data in and clustering it in real time, you're not getting an a priori biased view of the world, you're getting an organic mode of discovery about what's happening in our business environment, right? So clustering this information, you're on your way to your first step of finding out what people actually care about and what people are talking about. So let's talk about the rest of this framework now. So on this axis, we're simply talking about volume. How aware are people, right? So this is the exchange of ideas. These are people talking, these are people commenting, these are people providing their perspective on the world around them, right? And on this axis, what we have is emotion. I'm going to talk about emotion and why it matters. What we're concerned about here is the things that people are most emotional about, right? Because these are the things that are prompting people or driving people to act, right? Motivating people to get up off the couch and make decisions or go buy something. In more severe cases, what's driving people to subscribe to an ideology, strap a bomb to their chest, and pull the trigger? It's emotion that's driving those decisions. I'll talk a little bit about that. So, the founder of our company, Tony Sardella, was working for a large chemical company. And that chemical company was trying to introduce a new product into Europe. And all of the science behind that product said that the product was safe. The statistics said it's a 1 in 10 million chance that this is going to cause cancer. Okay. But they started to meet regulatory and public resistance. People didn't like the product. And the scientists and the engineers and the executives got together and said, what the hell's going on here? It's safe. Why don't people accept or adopt the product? And what they uncovered was that it's not a 1 in 1 billion chance that somebody's going to get cancer. But in the minds of the buyer, it was a 1-to-1 relationship. So they didn't actually have a scientific problem. They had a perceptual problem that was based on behavior, emotions, right? What's driving people to act. So when they started to dive into it, they started to look at, well, what makes people, what drives their behaviors? What's driving our decisions? And we call it emotion, but it's more than that. It's the actual cognitions that are based on our risk perceptions about how we perceive the world around us. So we use the National Academy of Sciences corpus of work to base our metrics on, where we actually look at the information and say, well, they were asking questions such as, how is it that people get into a vehicle, fasten up their safety belt, adjust the mirrors to take in their environment around them, drive off, and then light a cigarette, right? That's pretty compelling. You take all these measures to be safe in the vehicle. Your perception of risk is one thing on one hand, but then you go and light a cigarette, so it's something different on the other hand. So we're able to drive into these conversations what is prompting people to act. So when we look at this, you can see things like, for this particular snapshot, the millennials are looking at things such as, dystopian communities. They're concerned about vintage fashion, a whole bunch of things. What I found interesting about this was Kim Kardashian is way down here. High volume, low emotion. And we worked with a large credit card firm that was making decisions around who they should use as their celebrity sponsor for basic products, or for a few different products. And we actually told them, look, don't use Kim Kardashian for exactly these reasons. They chose not to. And what was interesting was a competitor scooped up Kim Kardashian, and they were mired in litigation because it was framed as predatory lending, high interest rates, and that type of thing. So anyway, this is one of the frameworks that we use at Evolve 24 all the time. It's one of organic exploration, and it's one that's really focused on what's prompting people to act, right? The great thing about this is that it's unearthing our bias so that we can make quant decisions about the environment around us. Now, I said I was going to comment on the millennials. What's really interesting, a lot of firms these days are also making decisions about the target markets that they should go after as well. The same process can be used with the right data, the right frameworks, and the right measures to identify targets, right? So rather than us a priori making decisions about who we think the target is, we can go out there and find out who that target might be. Okay? So just taking this a little bit further, we were working with we work in a number of different environments. We work with Fortune companies. We work in automotive, healthcare, finance. We also work in the entertainment industry. And one of the things that we're focused on using this data for right now is predicting the next big hit at the box office. Right? So what's driving all these sales for movies like Twilight or Harry Potter? what's the other one? Hunger Games is the other one that people are really into. So what we found with our research is that all of the underlying emotional drivers that underscore emotion are exactly the same thing that people are talking about when they're talking about their experiences with these movies and their attachment, their emotional attachment to these movies, to go and spend money on a movie ticket, spend money on merchandise, right? Tell their friends about it, all of these things. So high correlation between the things that these people care about in general, okay, on an emotional level, and then the relationship between those emotions and the movies that they're going out to talk about. So a little bit more about the emotion aspect of things, drilling down into what people care about. What we're doing is we're able to look at linguistic markers in this data. So this is part of drawing that value out of the data using indicators. So what we're doing is we're looking at emotion on a whole, but we're also looking at the emotional drivers that are making us make those decisions. And the National Academy of Sciences, as I noted, was doing research in this, and they identified hundreds of drivers in our cognitions that make decisions for us, right, in our processes. But they identified 20 that are most important in those decision-making processes throughout our days, you know, when we go to buy things. And one of those drivers is called human origin. And you ask, well, what's human origin? Well, the basic notion is that things that are perceived to be unnatural or from human origin are perceived to be more risky than things that are natural. Right? So they did studies, they put pictures in front of people and they said, tornado, natural, vice radioactive fallout, unnatural. Which one is more risky? Statistically, radioactive fallout, the chances are very slim you're going to die from radioactive fallout. Much higher here, of course, in the Midwest that you're going to die from a tornado, right? But people statistically pick the radioactive fallout as being more risky because of this perception that it's rooted in human origin, right? So marketers are very good at this stuff. And we like working with companies that are attuned to these types of drivers. You see it at play in the supermarket every time you go shopping, right? What do we see when we look at all the products on the shelves in the grocery store? Nice pictures of pastoral farms, you know, even more so now, organic, all natural,
puppies,
right? Puppies, right? So what is this doing to our buying behavior? It's lowering our stress and increasing our tendency to buy because it's natural, right? Imagine if this was flipped or inverted, right? If all of those packages were emblazoned with chemical names or, you know, the factories in which they were made, what's that going to do? It's going to increase our stress levels, reduce our buying behavior. So we're seeing correlations between things that people are emotional about, the underlying emotional driver that's driving them to act, and then outcomes such as buying behavior. Okay? So take this information and direct it, or directly apply it back to our businesses to start making decisions across these areas, right? Program and brand performance, consumer insight, right? Are there new markets out there that we should be tackling that we haven't thought of before? And then, of course, risk. So when we're looking at these universes of data, my background is mainly in risk management. I've got a penchant for understanding what drives problems for businesses from a non-market perspective, right? Companies all have their market issues. They deal with, you know, securities problems all the time. They deal with the economy all the time. But what about the other half of the equation, the non-market aspects, right? What NGO is going to stand up and try to limit your license to operate? What concerned scientist is going to publish a paper and try to pass regulation around your product? So when we think about all this data around us, we have a great capacity to set up what I call a Doppler, right? And if we can understand how to set up this Doppler correctly, what we can do in effect is actually start to see issues or opportunities in advance of them actually affecting our industry or even our business. So if you think of all of this data as different constellations, and you can look at whole markets, right? The US, maybe a BRIC country, right? Brazil, or maybe India. So you set that up as your outer perimeter, and you can start to understand what people care about within that market at large. And of course, you can start to make striations within that data, or make finer slices and say, okay, well, what are the different audience segments, and do they care about different things? But then within that Doppler, you can set up your industry. And you can start to say, okay, great. This is what people care about at large within the US. This is what people care about at large within the context of my industry. And this is what people care about at large in the context of my brand, my products, and my competitive set. So what you can effectively do is set up this radar to spot trends and issues before they back into your industry and before they back into your brand. And what's very interesting about setting up this type of system is that as issues or opportunities increase in their volatility, brand managers, what happens to all their time, their resources, their ability to react? There's an inverse relationship there, right? Issue increases in intensity, your time to react, your options to react diminish greatly, right? So the ability to see these issues or their opportunities early in their life cycle, we can achieve that with big data, right? Setting up this Doppler system. So when you start to understand what people care about at large, you can start to make intersections between my brand or my product and say, how's my brand performing in the context of what people know, or what people care about, rather? And these things may not be directly linked to your brand, right? So this is revolutionary for marketers, because what's interesting is that I find there's a tendency with marketers to say, okay, we have a higher purpose, or we have a cause, or we've got this great idea. We're going to go out there and spend a lot of money and make people care about it. Get people's attention, and they're going to care about it, and they're going to buy our product, because now they care about what we care about. The thinking is a little bit flawed. If you invert that thinking, and you say, well, what do people care about naturally? What's naturally motivating to them? And you look at the landscape through that unbiased lens, and then compare yourself to that canvas of cares, wants, desires, you can really start to understand, okay, we can drive a competitive edge here in terms of what's going on. So this is something we call a chiclet chart, okay? So when I look at the broad landscape of the US, I ask the question, what do people care about broadly? And I look up here in the top right quadrant or the top left quadrant, what people are most emotional about. I can now take those discussions and I can lay those things across this matrix and then compare how my brand is being discussed organically or how my product is being discussed organically. And I can take a look at how my brand opinion is doing. So in the context of a particular topic, am I faring well or am I not doing so well, right? And this is information that's very difficult to get out of the survey, because you can ask people about their experience with your BMW or your Nestle product, right? But it's very hard to get intelligence around, well, what do you think about my competitor? Right? They may not have an experience, but you can get the buyers of that product, and you can actually find out without spending a lot of money on surveys or focus groups or anything of that sort. This is what I find most fascinating about these chiclet charts. People tend to fixate on the positive and the negative. How am I doing from a brand perspective on against my competitive set in a positive or a negative standpoint? But the way I look at this universe of information is, look at all the white space.
Yes, what are the missing values?
Right. What the missing values are is
nobody's talking.
A market opportunity. So if you have the ability, right, the core competencies, the resources, the assets to move into that space, maybe develop a solution, develop affinity, you're now starting to build brand loyalty, right? You can service that unmet or latent need in that market. So that's what I find most interesting, and that's one of the applications that we do most frequently with a lot of our clientele. Is we look at the world and say, how is my brand doing? What's the white space? Any football fans in the room? No? Thursday night football's coming, guys. Gals. Yeah. Anybody notice that this past Super Bowl, automakers were pretty much absent? As I noted, we work with automakers. We're in Detroit all the time, love Detroit. And we've been doing studies around these emotional drivers and asking questions around sales. And actually, we live in a pretty neat place. We got the Federal Reserve of St. Louis in our backyard. And they've got a lot of neat data. And a lot of the models that we start from time to time use that data. It's a great resource. If anybody hasn't used Fred's data, have a look. It's amazing the content they have there. They're actually considered one of the most innovative federal banks, and it's quite something. So when we started thinking about demand models, what drives demand for automakers, right? How can we help automakers get more runway time in terms of not only their R&D, but also production, right? How can we buy them some time? So we've been working on some models, and we've been getting very good at it. We've been able to build lead times for auto manufacturers with up to a 2-month lead time in terms of auto sales. So when we see particular emotional drivers increase, we've been able to say 2 months later, sales are likely to decrease by X%. Right? So given the right type of sales data, the right granularity of sales data on this side, from the demand side, we're able to cross-thread that in a model, say, great, we can predict with a fair amount of accuracy what's going on with sales. So some of this intelligence was used to drive, not R&D, because 2-month window, you can't do much with that kind of information in terms of production and supply chain and everything else in the auto industry. But what you can do, you can certainly affect your marketing spend and your communication spend. Oh, a feeling of misunderstanding around the economy is increasing. Unsurety or uncertainty around the economy is increasing. That's a direct relationship to car sales decreasing 2 months from now. What should I do about that? Should I spend the $4 to $5 million at the Super Bowl? Or should I decide to opt out this year because I'm not going to see the type of returns that I would expect? Right? Particularly when it's something out of your hands, because it deals with people's concerns about the economy or some other foreign or domestic threat. Right? So you can start to gather this information up, build it into models with the right data, the right measures, and start to make business decisions based off this information. So I thought this was really interesting when we weren't building full-fledged models, but we were helping automakers make decisions about their communications and their marketing. And it was interesting to see that some of the automakers yielded to some of the information that we were producing. So before the conversation started tonight, I was talking to a couple people in the audience about sales and making better sales decisions. One of the things that we're doing with this type of data, and again, with the right granularity of information, we can start to build these models around what's driving sales up or down, what's causing customer attrition, right? Why are people returning my product? What's the conversation about? What's the emotional driver about? And start to understand, okay, when we see these emotions increase, we can expect sales to decrease. Or when we see this particular emotion drop, we can expect customer returns to increase, right? So how do we affect that? So one of the companies that we've been working with for quite some time is a durable goods company. And when we first started with them, and I can't reveal who they are, but they were a really interesting bird. They worked in an industry that was kind of considered slimy in terms of the product that they were selling. It was close to selling used cars in terms of all the surveys that they did. Like buying a car from or buying a product from a used car salesman is what they kept saying. So we not only helped identify with big data approaches and frameworks, new markets that they could uncover. Right? They had a fantastic technology. They didn't know how to sell it. They didn't know what the customer journey was. Who are the buyers? Where are they? We helped solve that puzzle for them, right? So, okay, these are the buyers. There's these types of markets. And of course, they were thinking in terms of like your traditional young, old, right, male-female matrix. But we uncovered buyers such as performance-minded people, right? So now you're starting to get down to value-based decision-making, right? You're making a connection with people on things that they value. So they had a product. They were able to identify the target markets. It was a product that they were selling at almost at a discount, and now they're claiming a large price premium because they've identified the right target, the willingness to pay for that product, okay? But now they're maturing. So they've figured out who their audience is, what their target is, and they started to see changes in their sales patterns, the customer returns. So we started to build models around emotion. So it's great that you can build a model around emotion and say that my sales is going to change 3 months from now. But what can I do about it today? So as I noted at the top of the hour, the fantastic thing about this corpus of big data that we have at our fingertips, readily available, publicly available, is that we can take this information and flow it through real-time dashboards and see what's changing in real time. So now a marketing manager can walk onto a smart board and say, okay, I know from previous models that when I see these discussions increase, 0.1 in an increase in this particular emotional driver is going to result in a 3% drop in my sales. They can jump on a smart board and start to say, okay, this has reached a threshold that's critical, and I need to do something about it. Click on that information and drill down into that content and start to make decisions based on what they're seeing in the conversation or in the digital activity that's happening around their brand and their product. Okay? So not only can you take a look at building better models, making better forecasts, but you can also start to, with the right core competencies, embed this into your business and start acting on this information in real time. It's quite remarkable stuff. Anybody have any questions up to this point? Brian? Oh, we'll take Brian. We'll come back. Sorry, yeah.
You mentioned this data is publicly available. You mentioned the Fed. Where is this data publicly available? Like, what are you pulling from, and what are you sourcing from?
Well, one of the big feeds that we pull down is we have a long-standing partnership with Twitter, and so we buy something called the fire hose from Twitter. We actually help Twitter develop the fire hose and what it needs to do from an API perspective. So we were grandfathered into many of their offerings, but Twitter is one of them, and there's a myriad number of data providers out there that offer this data.
Lots of social. Are you pulling from your customers' net promoter score type stuff, and obviously maybe some data? You know, every time I take my car in, I get that annoying survey a day later. Yep. You're pulling that kind of and creating a picture based on all that.
Yeah, our core data sets, right? Because a lot of this data, you know, big data, it's everywhere, right? We've got dark data in organizations, a bunch of sales data that people that maybe is being under leveraged. Well, if you have it, we'll take it and imbibe it.
Right.
And the other way around, if we have data that you need, we'll pass it to you, right? That's sort of the old model of doing things, passing data back and forth. The new model, the new way of doing things is taking all these fantastic indicators or measures and porting them over to where the data is. But our core data sets are social, okay? Twitter, Facebook, blogs, forums, likes, views, all of that information, as well as traditional media, radio, TV, digital news like the Huffington Post, okay? So all of that content.
So you scour that, digitize it, and say, our news trend is positive, our news trend is negative, whatever.
Right, exactly. So, but in addition to all that content, email, verbatims on a survey, right? The mysterious, unanalyzable aspect of a survey that traditional market researchers haven't quite figured out how to crack the nut on high volumes with, right? How do I handle all this Scrabble that's just been handed to me in a comment box? So being able to process all of this information, apply the right markers to it, you can unearth a lot of insight. And then, of course, building the right models around this data, you can do a lot of things with it. So what we try to do is when we're talking to folks about all of these data, bringing them together, what you have the ability to do is really build a core competency into your organization. And the people that can build big data, insights and strategic outcomes off this data, you've built a core competency into your organization that's going to allow or facilitate a competitive advantage.
So comparatively small, the emails per minute versus the posts on Facebook, I mean, comparatively small.
I used to know
300 million versus 2.5.
Yeah, I used to know some very interesting statistics around email, but it's been a while since I've worked on some of those projects.
Yeah.
But email's an interesting.
Ultimately, here's my question. Mm-hmm. So it's readily known that Gmail or Google reads your Gmail.
Sure.
Are they making, and they look at your drive, they look at your attachments. I mean, it's a fairly well known that occurs.
Right.
Do they make that data publicly siftable, available, or anonymized?
With their partners, they'll use that data with their partners.
And it's anonymized, I would assume, or do they non-anonymize?
I'm not sure about Google and what they do with that data, but company proprietary data, we've dealt with that type of data source in the past. Right. What do you do with that kind of data? Well, you can optimize loyalty programs.
Right.
Right? And that drives all the way back to your supply chain. What am I storing in my warehouse?
Right.
That nobody's redeeming their loyalty points for? How do I increase that? Or how do I make predictions about what I should even order? Right? So now what you're doing is you're increasing your turnover rates. All these things that we talk about at board meetings and at the executive level every day. You can actually start to affect.
So it's the summer. I'm a buyer for Macy's. Mm-hmm. I'm coming to you to figure out what to stock in my store for Christmas.
What do Americans care about?
Yeah.
What do they care about when they're talking about fashion? care about when they're talking about entertainment. All of these galaxies of information, when you set those Dopplers up, can provide a lot of insight into those types of applications.
Yeah.
So that's the absolute appropriate thinking, Brian. That's exactly the kind of questions that we're trying to solve. Yeah. There's one other question over here.
Yeah, so for somebody who's brand new to this idea, I mean, I've heard of big data, but I'm one of those guys that doesn't know really what it means. But how would you break down the primary components for a newbie? So, for example, I wrote down capture, distill, and interpret. So there's probably more big chunks than that. But how would you characterize?
I think that's a great characterization.
Okay.
It's collect, it's process, it's integrating it, and then visualizing it to make decisions based on that information. So I think the characterization that you made, I'm sorry, your name? Steve, I think is appropriate.
Okay.
But it's a matter of, it's a little bit of an oversimplification, because what you need to understand is what are the markers that we're going to use? What are the appropriate measures? Right?
Yes.
Because we don't want to be using the wrong measure, which is going to lead us to the wrong decision. Right? So it's about making sure that
And that would be a function of the distilling part.
Exactly. Right. So finding out what streams of information make the most sense in terms of the models that we're building, so that we can start to integrate this into real-time intelligence.
Okay.
And it's not easy to do. Admittedly, it's a tough process, making these decisions about, what type of markers I should be looking at. But what we found is that there's high causality between looking at what people care about and many of these outcomes that we're trying to solve for, right? Such as inventory turn or R&D spend.
So how would this whole subject relate to the idea of personas? So marketing company is developing, personas. Jill is, 28 years old. She's a runner and has, 2 kids, professional. And so does this help inform personas? Help you create personas? Help you reverse engineer personas?
Absolutely. So traditionally, personas are sort of an a priori thing. We say, okay, we think these are the buyers, or we've learned something from our survey or our focus group. It's a good starting point. There's an appropriate time for that type of method. But what if you can step out into the universe and say, okay, just tell me who's out there from a value-based perspective. Right? What do they care about naturally? And let those categories reveal themselves. Let the data stand up on its own, rather than us imbuing bias on that data.
Yeah.
Right?
So it takes the guesswork out.
It does. Because now what you're doing is you're basically taking the sieve of information and shaking it and letting it fall where it may lay.
Yeah.
And you're saying, oh, well, there's a performance-minded group. These are the things that they value and talk about. Here's another group that has health concerns of these types, right? And now what you're getting into is less about demographics, young, old, male, female, income levels, and more into what do people really value in their
Psychographics,
lives.
maybe?
It's exactly psychographics.
I would even add to that, even micro-segmentation, like you're able to market one-to-one now versus these giant groups of mass.
Great. Thank you.
So great question. There was one other question.
I was just curious, especially with we're in this season of the politicians coming up here in the next year, so there's always big data.
Oh, he said the P word.
Yeah, it's the same. So I'm thinking, like, let's say like Donald Trump. So we know his numbers right now. They're saying he's like 25% running compared to others. But there's also polls that said the chances of him winning at today's chances are like about 0,
right?
Because he's a good disturber. He's got a lot of people. So as these people buy this data and they're trying to pool together, you got him at 25%. You got a huge amount of the nation that will follow the Kardashians. And you try to put those two together and say, would they be the ones that more likely will vote for him because there's no intelligence in that side?
Right.
Let's say, there's no intelligence on that side, will they be the ones that will vote for him? And then he would be our candidate for being a president, but I'd say we'd be at a war probably within a week.
That's a good analysis, by the way.
So I'm just curious, when we get into big data, is these people who are buying the data, I'm hoping that they also have some intelligence to be able to say that some of this data has got to be really skewed by emotions, which is...
And I would say, I hope there's nobody that works in the political realm in the room. Maybe there is. But there's a big application in the political arena for all this type of intelligence. It's just finding somebody who's going to pay for it. So what's interesting about all the polls is we've actually been able to predict polls. And we've actually been able to do it in what's considered information deserts, places like Iran. Right? For the same reasons that we just discussed. You have flawed methods in terms of survey. It's not real time, it's rear looking, right? What happens when you bring that up into real time, unbiased, you can start to see what's happening. So there's applications. I'm not the one in the company to talk about our advocacy and political work, but we have applied it in those spaces. And we've actually seen that many of the polls are often incorrect. Right. And we've been able to prove those incorrect assumptions or findings with much of this type of big data.
I'm almost 60 years old, and I have never, in my 60 years, been interviewed by an exit poll at a presidential or any election. So I always wonder, am I that 1% that never gets polled? And you figure that there's all kinds of.
It's because they interviewed 500 people to make a prediction on a presidential election.
To represent
the sample size is so small.
Yeah. To represent the whole of the U.S., we're using 500 people, right?
Yeah.
So now on the modeling side of things, is the bulk of your modeling machine learning?
It's a mixture.
Okay.
So our clustering methods are machine learning, right? Our emotional measures are natural language processing. Okay. In terms of things like these models that we're running on real time on systems where we're making real time decisions, these models are learning in real time. Okay. But they're only as good as the partners we have to feed that language, right? So that's why we love our clients, because we've got these long-standing relationships. It's unheard of in our industry to have relationships longer than a year, never mind 8 years. So we're working on long-term plans with our clients so that we can build these types of models. So they're continuously learning. Something changes in the environment, it's being fed back into the model. Back here?
Yes. From your perspective, how and where are the limitations of big data?
I think it's simple. It boils down to people and the thought process behind it. And it's as simple as that for me.
Can you
But
elaborate on that?
That's on the collection side, right?
It's on the folks who can take this information and actually do something with it and make decisions about what they should be using in the toolbox and what they should not be using. Right? What's helpful? What's hurtful?
So choosing the markers, for example, would that be part of the?
Yeah. So and even in contexts where you have limited markers, right? Knowing how to use those tools in a resourceful manner. Right? So I was telling Brian before we started today at Evolve 24, we actually love the current academic climate because all the funding's dried up, and we're getting massive amounts of talent walking through our door out of biostatistics, right here in our own backyard at WashU, right? Biostatistics, finance, actuaries, right? All these people that had application experience, right? Not just somebody walking out of a postgraduate statistics course, but somebody who actually has application experience there on the data, along with people who understand the business. It's that linkage that matters most, and I think that's really the sky's the limit. You can do as much as you can dream up, insofar as you have the right data, the right indicators and measures, and then the right people to execute on all of that information to build the right model.
What was I going to say is, I see this having a lot of practical value on a B2C model. For instance, when you have lots of data points to be able to say, okay, we can use these predictors to know when our aerosol air freshener is, sales are going to go down. Once you start to convince that pool of decision makers, like in large business deals, where you maybe only have 1 or 2 decision makers, the CEO or COO of the organization, and you're talking about a business deal that might be like $70 million contract or something like that.
Well,
how would you address the ability of big data to support predictive models on how customers buy in that scenario?
In the B2C scenario or
in the B2B
in the B2B scenario? Yeah. So there's this notion, there's a paucity of data in the B2B space, I'll use a real life example. We were working with a firm that was trying to understand what enterprise buyers, this is so boring, enterprise buyers, so sorry to any technicians in the room, but enterprise buyers of cloud computing technology. What do they think about? What do they care about, right? So these are the folks that are hiding out in the back room at your company, the introverts, who don't talk to anybody, but the insular group that they belong to. And you're able to pull up big data information around what they actually care about, what they're thinking about in terms of capital expenditures for large companies.
Right.
So you can unearth that. So going back to the earlier question too, part of that competency is collection, right? Being able to parse out what's B2B versus B2C, right? Another example, and I'll be mindful of time here, we've got about 5 minutes left. Another example, we were working with a large energy company who was embroiled in the Fukushima disaster. Okay, you're talking about a multi-stakeholder global scenario where the stakes are high. And you can't make a mistake, right? So what was interesting was this firm was embroiled in the problem. They had all these stakeholders who were attacking them. It was their product that was involved in the catastrophe. And while the catastrophe wasn't their fault, it was their product, right? There was a failure on their side. And they were all prepped. They had their high-powered, high-paid PR firm with their nice, neatly packaged message that said, we're going to go out right now and we're going to say these things to these people through these channels and everything's going to be awesome. We said, hold the phone. We were in the war room. We said, hold the phone. That's not what we're seeing from a global perspective. And not only does your message disagree with what we're seeing in real time, but there's nuances across the globe, different countries, different stakeholders, government versus the public, right? Versus utilities, versus all these different strata of our society. So while it's not a buying decision per se, it's certainly one that has large implications in terms of your future, in terms of revenue, your forecasts and things like that. If you mess up in this environment where the stakes are high, right, well, one wrong message, the wrong constituent could potentially destroy you. Check your bias, basically.
It's a great point because people think of revenue generation as buying decisions exclusively,
right?
And it's not. It's it's managing things on the operation end, it's managing things in the public relations end.
Right.
All of those things lead to ultimately what a company's revenue or revenue growth is.
And it's such a great point that you make. It's the market, but it's also your non-market, right? All the people that have a say in your business that don't hold a piece of the stock, right? How are they going to affect outcomes? So it's fascinating stuff.
One more quick question.
Oh, okay. We've got one quick question here. What we got?
So you had said earlier that companies that decide to invest in big data can have a competitive advantage.
Right.
And I would guess that if a company makes that decision, then they would probably be smart to have people in lots of different pieces of their business on the listening end, because there's the human component you're talking about, what markers are we going to pick. So it seems like it makes sense not just to have marketing people involved in this and listening to their customers before, during, and after the sale.
It's a very good point. What we deal with now, it's very interesting to see this maturation happening within Fortune 500 companies. We deal with what's called fusion centers. These are cross-functional teams with people from across the enterprise bringing intelligence to bear on business problems. And they're cross-functional, cross-data teams, and they're intended to solve these problems. But it's very much the people who are in these seats at these fusion centers that are making the difference. So we're involved in that kind of operation all the time, building these centers, setting goals, building work product, workflows, setting up the key performance indicators around how well we're performing, are we hitting our goals, okay? 1 minute left, guys. So, key takeaways. We've got just 3 easy ones here. We've got, all of this data is changing the way we do business, okay? It's completely flipped everything on its head, but it offers a lot of opportunity. Big data on its own isn't inherently valuable. You need to enrich it. You need to fortify it. You need to know what to look for in it. And with the right inputs, you can start to make better predictions. And I think with my horrible PowerPoint slip, I think I revealed my prediction, which is you guys were looking at orange kangaroos in Denmark. Let's see a show of hands of how many picked orange kangaroos in Denmark. Okay, my prediction wasn't as hot as it normally is. Okay, I understand that this is a little bit contrived, okay? But the point is that with this, if you understand the physics of the inputs, you can start to make better predictions about endpoints, right? So typically I'm pretty good with this trick. It's about 70–80% accuracy rate in terms of my prediction. And there's a little reveal as to why this little parlor trick works. But it's a simple thing when you're thinking about, okay, inputs, endpoints, picking the right questions, and even influencing behavior, right? Understanding how people make choices, right? So I was able to guess orange kangaroos in Denmark because of all these aspects. Okay, at least I thought I did. I mean, I don't know who the heck picked Djibouti or Dominican Republic, but anyway. Thank you so much for the questions. Thank you, Angela, for the invite. This has been fantastic. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it enriching.